What day is it?
Time is meaningless at this point. I don't know.
Is it?
I don't
Is it
know.
a weekend?
I don't know. I legitimately do not know, Marie. I have no idea.
Are you still Chris?
I'm definitely still.
Am I still Marie?
I'm definitely. Yeah, I think that part hasn't changed, but I think that has more to do with the permeance of self rather than the impermeance of time right now. Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, maybe Marie Mayhew. Marie.
I don't know anymore. Who am I? Who am I?
Who are we? What are we? Why are we?
Oh.
What a time. What a time.
All right. No, I'm doing good. We're good. How are you doing? Is it weathering it well? I hope all of our listeners are hanging in there.
Yeah, I hope everyone's
doing the right thing.
Hope everyone's
listening
doing well.
to science.
Wash your hands. Don't
wash your hands.
Don't drink bleach.
For the love of God, don't drink bleach.
No, we're doing good. We're doing good. I really can't complain here. But tell you what, Marie, be doing a lot better if I was living on one of these psionic islands. The topic of today's episode.
Some good stuff. We finally get into the cults.
Finally, we get into cults. We've been trying to do cults forever, Marie.
Finally.
I love cults.
We love cult. And what is not to love about a cult?
Oh,
that's
so
the
good.
problem, right? They are so eminently lovable when you first get to know them.
So this series, we are going to start off with a story about a cult that maybe you haven't heard of. It's likely that most of our listeners have not heard of this cult before. Maybe some of the ones in Australia will have heard of them before just because of proximity. But it's actually a pretty small cult still, although it has a lot of negative effects on its members. In many ways, the cult that we're going to be talking about today is very similar to the United Nation of Islam or even Jonestown, although like pre-Kool-Aid or pre-Flavor Aid, I guess I should say Jonestown, right? So before it was famous, this cult is very similar to those other ones in the idea that service to the leader, and specifically service in the name of like betterment of self, but without any kind of economic benefit to you, really. So you're just like working to make yourself a better person, and then that money is just kind of like going into a black hole at your compound. That's the kind of cult that we're talking about here today. Next episode,
which is sort of the basis of every cult, right?
Yeah, in some ways, it's kind of the basis of like most cultish kind of belief systems. And then next week, we're going to go a little bit more into like the psychology of cults. What makes people join a cult? How do you get someone to leave a cult? Those kinds of things. So I hope you are ready today for the Church of Enoch. So today's episode, we're talking about probably one of the most successful cults of like the late 2000s, I'd say. Although it's not one you've heard of yet, because frankly, you haven't heard of the cults that haven't been raided yet by the FBI.
Exploded.
The ones that haven't imploded yet are the cults you haven't heard of yet. But there's a lot of them active at any one time across the world, frankly. So today's cult is especially unknown in the United States because it's headquartered in the Pacific Islands. So it's actually headquartered on a small island it was initially headquartered on a part of Japan called Kyushu, but then was transferred over now to one of these like string of Pacific islands that the leader and his followers essentially own. I mean, but again, the followers don't own anything. It's all the leader that owns everything. Today, this cult that has been called the Church of Enoch, or the COE, stretches all the way from, again, like the southern parts of Japan all the way down to Pacific islands like Java and Borneo and the Philippines and places like that. Now, the founder of this group is he's a man named Foma Fyodorovich Enoch. And so he's Russian. He began the cult in the mid-90s. And initially, the cult was really limited towards... At first, when he didn't start it as a cult, right? No cult leader starts out being like, we're going to start a cult, right? That's not how it happens. He started out...
maybe a bit... got a little bit of control issues.
Oh, right? Sure,
like the cult becomes a cult, but yes, it started from good community service or wanting to do good for the larger cause.
Right, so the cult, if we had to kind of describe it quickly, it's sort of it's a pseudo-Confucianist cult that focuses on communist literature and belief systems. I call it Confucian because first off, it's in that area, right? It's really popular in Korea and in Japan, and somewhat in China, but the Communist Party is pretty tight on any kind of like religious-ish belief in China. But it has this kind of idea of like there being a leader who is, a holy person on earth or is to be revered and not questioned. And this idea of like a very strong social hierarchy and deference and things is really important in this cult. And so this Foma has kind of used this as a way to control his followers and find a natural control mechanism. It's very similar in some ways to North Korea.
Yes. Even with some of the pageantry and with the idea of it, the wisdom comes from one source or one person.
Right, yeah.
Right? It's easily digestible, and it's not religious, but it's still dogmatic.
Right, this is a man who loves parades, people.
Yes.
So initially these things started out. So, okay, let's start at the beginning. So Foma Enot, or Foma Fyodorovich Enot, Fyodorovich being the patronymic name that is given in Russia, he was born May 30th, 1964. And the town he was born in is called Litsvyanka in Russia, technically kind of Belarus. It's not super clear on like Wikipedia and stuff where this place is located officially, but like it was Belarus, but now it's Russia, but maybe it's still East Belarusian or whatever. This town, it's
gone through some change.
Yeah, it's a really small town though. That's important, right? It's right outside of Irkutsk, and it's near Lake Baikal, which maybe some listeners know from the Astonishing Legends episode on Lake Baikal. That was actually legendary because it was the founding of Marie and my takeover of the world relationship, which is very important. So
yeah, Pinky and the Brain, man. We decided to do it then. It was Lake Baikal.
Killing it.
God.
So Enot, again, born May 30th, 1964. He's born in this small town that sits outside of Irkutsk, which is a much larger city. So Litsvyanka was at the time, it was known as a worker settlement, which is actually a specific classification in the old USSR. It's still kind of used, but so what it meant was this was a place that was meant to house industrial workers, fishermen, farmers, whatever the local
proletariat.
Yeah, like right, whatever the local proletariat was, this was the city for them. And so the population today is only 1,800. Around like 2000s in like in the early 2000s rather, but it's basically always hovered between like 500 and 2,000 people. Right? So we don't have to
I would say too, going into like the, 2000s towards when he was growing up, it was not a thriving economy, right? Exactly. Or it was not a thriving, there's not a lot of future for the proletariat.
No, it's never.
Except in propaganda.
Right. It's never been.
Not a growth industry for anybody.
No, it's never been a particularly rich area, right? Like Marie said. No. So his father, Fyodor Kristovich Enot, ran what today we might consider to be like a co-op farm, but in the USSR was known as a kolkhoz or a kolkhoz, which was it was essentially like a government-run farm that was headed up by a member in good standing of the Communist Party, and then would they'd farm the land, they'd get stuff, and they'd send it back to the central repository, and then it would get distributed around. Right. So his father ran one of these areas.
They didn't even really make any money off of that.
Well, no, any
kind of terms.
No.
It was almost like a commune.
What's interesting is
the American equivalent would sort of be a commune.
Right. What's actually really interesting is that a lot of people believe that, it's clear that this was kind of the starting point for this is how his cults are based. This is how his cities, I should say, or his communes are set up.
Yeah. His communities
right? Yeah,
are built.
His communities are these kind of kolkhoz systems, right?
Yeah.
So his father was this kind of good Communist Party man who ran this sort of commune farm thing. His mother's name was Dasha. She was a housewife essentially, but they met because she was the daughter of the local Communist Party leader. So Dasha was initially from Kazakhstan. So she was like half Kazakh, half Russian. And then Foma is a quarter Kazakh. But so they were placed in Irkutsk to help run the local government of that city. And so we don't know exactly, like, there's not a like a lot of stuff from the former Soviet Union,
Yeah.
especially in these small
not a lot
areas.
of stuff's getting out.
There's not a lot of info really, but based on like interviews and stuff and other things, we believe that his mother and father must have met. It just is sensible that they must have met at like a Communist Party function, right? They must have met somewhere like that.
And it was, I would imagine too, especially during this time, it was, while I'm sure it was a marriage of love, it was also one for convenience for the Communist Party. And if you have a state-run farm, the best allegiance that you can make is, a tie to that party, right? So it's sort of just like a link in that chain that's ultimately works its way back to the head Communist Party.
Right, exactly. So we know that they were married in 1960, and then of course had their son Foma in 1964. Doesn't appear that he has any brothers or sisters or anything. Although again,
which is sort of unusual. Yeah.
But again, like we don't really know all that much about that, and he's not exactly talking about his history.
No, not a lot of pictures from his childhood.
No. Thanks, Communist Irkutsk. So okay, what we do know
no
though,
Christmas cards.
What we do know, and a lot of his interviews are still like either in Russian or Japanese, which makes them not exactly the easiest to read. Thank you, Google Translate. We know that his family, so late 70s, he's becoming like, he's like 16, 17. His family has enough connections that he's able to go to a boarding school for like privileged party members' children, right? So he gets sent to this boarding school, and specifically he immediately finds that he has a talent for languages. So he is able to learn, like through his schooling, he learns Chinese, English, Japanese, and Korean. As well as, building on the Kazakh language that his mother had taught him. So in Kazakhstan, it's like a mix. They speak Russian, but they also have a native Kazakh language. So he kind of learned both of those in his home, but got better at it at his school.
And I think it's warranted to say that also when he starts to go to school, he is a charismatic person. Like people like him. They want to listen to him. He's sort of a natural follower, or he is a natural leader who likes followers. He's charismatic. And
actually that talent that he has is going to be developed by the school itself and by his mentors and things, because they put him in the diplomatic corps. So they essentially say to him, okay, well, you're clearly like even in the United States, right? They basically say, we're going to breed you from this point forward to become a statesman, right? To become a leader of the Communist Party, to become a diplomat, to become someone who can work with these other communist countries like China, like Korea, like they were hoping Japan might become. That's kind of why he was thrust in that kind of position, right? But he did find quickly he liked power. He liked being able to tell people what to do. And just kind of liked having his, having his fingers in a lot of pies, I guess, is the grossest way to say that.
Yeah, I think he had a very diverse group of interests, right? He was good at a lot of things. He was good at business. He had an appreciation for the arts. He liked agriculture. Like he had a very well-rounded sort of set of skills and personalities.
Absolutely. He's not a dumb person, right? He's very smart. He was really deep into kind of Communist Party literature as well, in philosophy, and immediately had a connection or interest in Mongolia and the Mongols, especially, not just Mongolia, but like the Mongols, right? Again, his mother is Kazakh, so a lot of that kind of like the culture of like nomadic plains groups and things was always of interest to him. But in this time period, he really developed a fascination with Genghis Khan, right? And that kind of idea of like, building the world and creating this like one communist party system, right? Seems to have been something that really spoke to him as a kid. Or as a young man, I guess I should say. He's not really a kid at this point. He's
a young man, yeah. Which is now also in the late 80s, early, coming into the late 80s, mid 90s, starting to be very different from where the Communist Party is now.
Right.
And happening in Russia, right? Like Genghis Khan was much more of a might make right, conqueror versus kind of what's happening in the geopolitical world. that time.
Yeah, and so it's actually really it's like tragic comedy almost. He finishes school, so he finishes like college, or I guess kind of the equivalence of what we would consider to be like graduate school, like not really a PhD,
yeah,
but
diplomatic corps, almost like a diplomatic corps program.
Yeah, like finishing school, right? He gets done with schooling in 1988, so 2 years before the Soviet Union falls. So not going great, right? Not going great for him.
No.
So,
no, but this is also when we think that he also, what's happening in the Soviet Union is you see a lot of oligarchs beginning to make inroads, a lot of profiteering, a lot of very loose entrepreneurial capitalism happening. So this is also where he's going to make some contacts or have some learning outside of his sort of finishing school that is going to better enable him to make money in the future as well.
Right. And so I don't think though that I don't think it would be too much to say that this period of like this is a person who grew up believing communism, believing Soviet propaganda, believing that the Soviet Union was this like perfect society. You know what I mean? And for his life, like even though he grew up in like a poor kind of farming community, he was then very quickly sent to the best schools, the best areas. He was sent, he wined and dined these, like he was given the best of the Soviet lifestyle that could be given. Right.
Yes.
And so like we often wonder,
which
like
is shady no matter what.
Right. But just
the best
like
of the Soviet lifestyle is coming from other people's money.
Right. Still not great. But we don't like, I guess what I'm trying to get across is just like in those documentaries on North Korea, where the people they show are always like looking healthy and happy and whatever. That's because they are like the party's best. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And
yes, the poster children for that movement.
Right. And so Enot is one of those kinds of people, right? He is one of their he's one of their best. So he really bought into the Soviet propaganda. And as the Soviet Union started to disintegrate, and as these, people in his life that he looked up to, just as his way of life started to disintegrate, it did not go over very well with him. He was shattered. You know what I mean? And so what this eventually led to is he completely leaves Russia. He actually goes and lives he lives in Vietnam for a little bit. He lives in South Korea for a little bit. He's living, he just kind of moves around. Right. And so he'll eventually see the fall of the Soviet Union, obviously completely in 1991. But by that point, he's already kind of given up on that idea of a Soviet Union and said, you know what? Screw all of you. I'm going to do it myself. And that's kind of in a weird way the driver that makes him want to, or at least I think is the driver, or one of those drivers that makes him want to kind of get out there and really start getting into all this, I don't know.
Yeah.
This shady, terrible stuff that he does.
Well, and I think that, the disillusionment in any belief system, that can, what I think is interesting is the disillusionment in that belief system, but then how he kind of co-opts that into what he does next, right? So it's not a total 180. It's not like he's throwing away all of it he learned, or like his upbringing, or sort of the contacts he had, or how he was going to structure things. He just reappropriates them into his next iteration to make himself more powerful. Right, which is still very much like the Communist Party, but it's now him just sort of doing it for himself.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting, I don't know, man. I don't even know. It reminds me almost of those. I don't know if you've ever read those stories of after World War II ended, there were still Japanese soldiers who were living in the jungle,
Yes.
And they were just waiting for Japan to, I guess, find them on the islands or whatever.
Yeah.
I can almost, it's almost like that's what he was like, forget it. The dream is dead, maybe over there, but I'm going to keep living it myself.
But it borders on that fanaticism, right? The religious fanaticism. But to your point, it's sort of like the sheer will and the sheer propulsion of his own belief is what's going to take him to his next level.
Absolutely. And so at this point now, he's living, like I said, he lived in these kind of like Vietnam, Thailand, Japan, South Korea. He's kind of moving around all over the place. He finally lands in the 90s in Japan. And specifically, he lands in an area outside of Tokyo. Like, I don't want to call it's not really a suburb of Tokyo because they kind of define suburbs differently in Japan, but it's in Chiba Prefecture. It's the city of Kamagaya is where he ends up starting this church. It's not really even a church, this like commune, right? It's where he starts his group.
It's a commune, yeah.
Is in Kamagaya. And so with that, we're going to take our first break and then come right back.
Message and data rates may apply. More than a piece of paper or entry on your resume. A college degree is a daily reminder of what you can accomplish and a step toward creating new opportunities. If you're looking to obtain your bachelor's degree or advance in your profession with a master's degree, and you're in search of a highly respected university that works with your schedule, consider Arizona State University. ASU offers over 200 programs online, from education to healthcare to engineering and more. Students who study online receive the same high-quality education taught by ASU's world-renowned faculty and experience the same dedicated support as on-campus students. Plus, you'll earn the same degree, joining a global network of over 500,000 alumni. Discover why over 90% of ASU graduates were employed or received a job offer 90 days after graduation. Text ANSWER to 35517. Whatever your life's pursuit is, at Arizona State University, we empower you to thrive. Explore ASU online. Text ANSWER to 35517. That's ANSWER to 35517.
And we're back.
All right.
Talking cults.
So one thing you'll notice about all those places we said that Enoch kind of moved around was they are all they all had communist parties of their own. They all had like communist tendencies in one way or the other. And so, and it kind of seems weird that like Japan would be the place that he landed. Japan, I think Marie is right that he's almost more of an oligarch than he is a communist. Japan had
oligarch in training,
right? Like Japan had all the stuff that he needed. You know what I mean? It had connections to people that he had connections that he could utilize. It had an easy flow of currency and goods and everything else. It also did have its own. It also did have its own communist party. So the Nihon Kyosanto, which I just probably said completely wrong, even though I tried to retry it there. It did have its own Japanese Communist Party that's still in existence in Japan. It's close enough to those places that he can be still connected and maybe, get back in with the party somehow or whatever. But it's also far enough away that he can kind of do stuff on his own without being really watched.
Yeah. Well, and the Japanese government at the time is not focused on. It's focused on making money itself.
Right.
In the 90s, it's advancing, it's more technologically focused. They are not going to, and they really don't want to have anything to do necessarily with heavy duty religion. But China, on the other hand, he would have come into problems with the Communist Party there. Now, I think here's where he's going now. Cause now he's in this weird in-between space now.
Now here's the other thing too, that's kind of interesting, right? So we said before that his mother was Kazakh.
Yes.
For those of you that don't know this, so the people of Kazakhstan, or at least some portion of the people of Kazakhstan, have very essentially Asiatic features, right? So he's able to kind of blend in with Japanese society in a way that another foreigner would not be able to, because he kind of looks Japanese, right? That's not possible. Because Japan is weird at this time because they're very I think there's this idea of people like neckbeards who watch anime and whatever think of Japan as this it's so kooky and weird. Japan is super conservative and very, very uptight and very, very, I guess, Confucian still, just very structured, very rigid, right? And he's going to play off of that rigidity in a way as well here. But the only reason he's able to start in Japan is because he blends in. You know what I mean? If he was some
Swede.
Right, exactly. Like, if he was some guy from like Norway or whatever, or he looked like, Vladimir Putin, he moved to Japan, he'd probably have a harder time, right? So,
Yes.
he starts up one of these. He doesn't call it a kolkhoz, but it's essentially what he starts. He starts a communist style community garden. And so this place, the promises that the thing that he promises with this garden is essentially, you can come here, you can work on the land. Working in that way is going to heal you. It lets you get away from the the tension and the anxiety of living in such a technological and such a structured society as Japanese culture.
The rigid structure,
right?
That is just, yes.
So
you can start doing things for yourself.
Exactly.
Become self-actualized.
Exactly. And so he also kind of sells a little bit of this idea of like a return to nature, right? So like Marie's saying, that self-actualization, but also a little bit of this idea of like getting back to nature lets you become more natural. And I mean natural in like the stupid way that like goop often means natural, right? Like natural just means good.
Taking a swing at Gwyneth Paltrow. You're not beholden to anyone, right? There's no one. It's very free will centric, right? There's nothing that's governing who you should be or what your responsibilities are, or the structure. You are creating your own structure,
right? And like most cults, it starts off with that like perfect view. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It starts off with this like crazy idea of like, we're just gonna trade stuff. We're gonna live off the land. No one's gonna tell us what to do, whatever.
Yeah.
And then eventually the leader is like, right, no one's gonna tell you what to do but me. Right? Like it always starts off great. Yeah. So over time, so he starts this in like the kind of early 90s, like 94, 95. It develops over time. And so, 1994, he begins introducing rigid rules. And the reason is because, at least in theory, he says, the reason to introduce these rules is because they're getting away from the point of the original farm, right? Because this whole time, they're selling the stuff they make on the farm to help, do community events and, get better stuff and whatever, right? Buy more land.
And that's the front of it, right? Because there's also money coming in probably for larger purchases and to substantiate them that we don't know what that's from. There's still some shady stuff.
Based on how shady things get later on, it's undoubtedly he was sowing shady seeds then. Why did I pick such a hard
good tongue twister?
To say.
That was good. But it's true. You can sort of see what, as he left, communist Russia during the fall, during sort of the oligarchs, sort of just a little bit of that is following with him, that clearly he hasn't, he still has some contacts, but he still is a very charismatic. I think we should reemphasize that, because it's like, you don't get to sort of put these rules in place and you can't do that without being charismatic or being able to sell your authority as a good thing. Right? So you can't enslave people without them willing on some level to, with cults, they have to want to buy in.
So essentially what happens here to make that happen, and Marie's completely right? The way that this happens here is, so this entire time he's been living on the farm, and so he's exemplifying this kind of idea of a return to nature and everything else. And slowly over time, people are asking, can I live on the farm too? And so as they say, or as he starts letting them live on the farm, he's telling them to live here. You're going to live here rent free. You're going to be able to eat the food all you want, whatever. To be able to do that, though, I need you to do these things. And he says that the point of these is so that they don't kind of ruin, they don't bring in all of those aspects of the culture around them that they're trying to escape. So some of the rules, for instance, that he says, or some of the rules that they have to live on the farm are, you can't have any outside items. So it's all stuff that they make internally, or that is purchased by FOMA or his kind of inner circle that starts to develop around that time. Right. He requires atheism, or at least the removal of religious symbolism, no religious discussion, no overt religious symbolism or displays. they they can only, again, because they're only using the stuff that's on the farm, the stuff they're able to like consume, like in terms of media, is also very limited. And then they also have to, if they're going to live on the farm, they have to give tithe. So they have to tithe in a little bit somehow, right? The tithing starts to go out to everyone. And so initially the tithing starts as like, okay, we're going to grow all this, we're going to grow all these fruits and vegetables and everything else. You can sell some of the stuff you make on this land. Cause again, the farms are getting bigger and bigger, right? We can't stress that enough. The farms are getting larger and larger here. And so eventually they have enough food for the people that live on the farm to live off of that stuff. And the other people using the land, they're just like, well, you can do what you want with it, but you have to pay us for the use of the land, right? Which is their tithing system there. And so again, that starts happening, and they actually get so successful that they're able to start a company. And so 95, they found what becomes known as the Psionic Farming Cooperative, which helps them again
awesome sounding.
It sounds great. It's such a cool freaking name, right? And so essentially what it allows them to do now is, so they have all this land, they're now a corporation, so they can start buying larger things, right? They're legally protected and all that kind of stuff that being a corporation allows you to do. But they're also able to kind of have like a business arm that does stuff that maybe the inside group or the people living on the farm would frown upon, such as selling the land or using the farmland for all kinds of other stuff or whatever.
Yeah. You can start to see like sort of the formation of more business and more, like you were saying, like corporation, but it's not readily apparent on the face of, to the followers or really even to sort of the culture or the society that it would interact with, right? Because it's still like he's very particular about who they allow in to these co-ops, right?
Yes.
They're very particular. However, they also maintain a very strict image facing forward that is sort of this balance of the cooperative and sort of the utopian lifestyle. But they're definitely building up, when they incorporate, they're definitely building up a structure to make acquisitions, to begin to diversify. They are getting money, seemingly, because again, like farming, they're profitable, they're doing well, but they're, if you look at sort of their overall income structure and kind of what they have, I just don't think farming and sort of the agrarian lifestyle that they have would be substantiated by a lot of this stuff.
With all of the airplanes that they own, there's no way it's just farming.
There's no way.
There's no way.
And we'll get into that. Yeah. Like kind of their mobility with this stuff is pretty amazing.
No, there's no way. So okay, they start this group in 95, and then the next year they actually move their headquarters, or kind of their main place, to the island of Kyushu. So they move from Kamagaya, where they had kind of a smaller footprint, to now this island of Kyushu, which is like southern Japan. But at the same time that they move down there, they also start buying up. So Japan, it's weird. Japan has a lot of deserted islands. Or like uninhabited islands, I guess I should say. Yeah, they have a lot of there's a lot of island land in Japan that's not being used for anything that the government of Japan sells. And so they start buying up pieces of that uninhabited land and creating communes on those islands. Right?
Yes.
And so what they begin to do, though, is it's now that the cult of personality and the development of like really stringent controls start to happen here. So I'll give you an example of how one of these kind of areas work, right? So they start off with, you begin an island. So you have this island that they purchase. And then from there, they essentially have people that will move in. They'll do a little bit of like setting up farmland and stuff like that, and kind of general amenities, but like nothing crazy, right? So there's like,
and on the flip side, making sure that they're isolated,
right?
That the technology and like the landlines and sort of the ways to communicate with the mainland or the outside world are closely monitored or practically non-existent, right? So they're doing like sort of all this nefarious infrastructure stuff at the same time.
Right. So and so by doing that, then all of their information, so like the mail is delivered by this group, right? Internet, like access to information is controlled by this group because they're the ones that control the information flow to these islands, right?
Phones, being able to reach your family or friends outside.
All of that is strictly controlled. And so they basically create a way whereby everything that happens on these islands. So again, the way that they kind of recruit people is you're given a pamphlet or a leaflet or something. It's, it says, listen, are you unhappy here? Are you disaffected? Do you feel like there's too much pressure on you living in these countries, right? Living in the place that you're from now. And actually they have a really high conversion rate, it seems, of people who fail the university exams to get into like good universities in Japan or Korea. Because like that's such a pressure point. You know what I mean? That's such a pressure point there. So he's able to say, have you failed at your career? Do you feel like your career is going nowhere? Whatever. Come live with us, right? You don't need any money. You don't need any stuff. You'll be a farmer. You can live off the land and you can build this world for yourself. It's a very, very enticing offer, I think, for a lot of people. And so, on these islands, each of them, your social status and your status within the cult have a huge effect on the stuff you're given access to. So how nice is your house? Where are you placed on the island? In what order do you get like mail? What in order do you get food at the kind of, area where food is doled out and stuff? How many phone calls can you make a month? All of that stuff, all those perks go through the community. And the way that they control that is they use an internal currency called coals, also known as coal credit. I don't know if it's coals or cole, but it's Kole. And that's the only way of getting anything on these islands. You transfer these credits, you whatever. And that's the way that you get like food, or you get a shovel, or you get whatever you need, right? Like a car, whatever you need to live on this island.
Right. And I think what is insidious about it, again, is you can see it in any other cult. It does the exact same thing. I use like Ruby Ridge and Waco just because I feel like they're recent and they're also kind of a good comparison point. Is like you control any touch point that person may have with any type of culture or any type of media or any type of communication, right? You are the person that they have to go through to get that. You are the person that they go through for validation and for a sense of self-worth. You are the person that, that feeds them and that clothes them and gives them that kind of an identity and helps them feel like they are self-sufficient. However, all of their self-sufficiency is reliant on one entity, and that's you. And I think the thing that's insidious too is like, even if you're in these communities and you start to ask questions, or if you start to kind of rebel, they've kind of put in ways to socially regulate rebellion and make sure that even if you are acting out or trying to get messages to the outside world, that they kind of control that as well.
Right. And right?
Frankly, so if you're trying to slip something out, or they're trying to slip, your friends or family are trying to, get something into you, they intercept it and kind of, again, monitor everything and then give you some very sanitized version of your active rebellion to kind of, give you that outlet, but then also reinforce like why you're there. Like your family members are like, oh no, this is really good for you. Like we think that we're so proud of you doing this, instead of like, we're sending a SWAT team in to get you out kind of thing.
Well, that's the thing. It's very similar to the United Nation of Islam, where Royal Jenkins, creates this cult, but basically and it's using child labor, right? Is the United Nations of Islam is one of their big things. Or one of the big things that's said that they do. They're using this labor and not paying people for it, but giving out social credit, essentially. It's the same thing that's happening here, right? And unfortunately, social credit doesn't get you a lot of money there's not a great return on US dollars for social credit.
Yeah, it's not a recognized currency yet.
So, with the building of these communities now, also comes a further kind of cult of personality, I'll say. So, first off, there are these internal economies where everything is purchased with these same credits, right? These coal credits. And again, your status or your rank within the cult or within, I guess, kind of the grouping structure determines
your favor.
Exactly. Determines how close you get to live to the leader, right? How big is your island? How big is your, or how nice, I guess I should say, is your island? Not really how big, but how nice is the island? How developed is it, right? How is your house? How is your other, are you allowed to get luxury goods?
Yeah. And how well does Enoch respond to you for your own self-worth, right? How much does he trust and bestow his grace and love on you?
And that's
right? Like,
yeah,
that's the other big thing besides like, physical and kind of luxury items is like that he trusts you and he wants to bring you into more and have you do more and become more integral to the working of the farm itself.
Right. In a weird way, the more favored you are and how much more status you have is actually worse because you end up doing more work. Like you end up having to produce more stuff. Right. And it's, I don't know, it's very insidious that way. So, the other thing that they do is they actually do a lot of ritualistic kind of events. So there are like we said, not really parades, but like festivals, right? To celebrate like the founding of the group or the day that the commune was established or whatever, right? Milestones in the community that happen are always ritualized. On top of that, every morning there are announcements that are, again, ritualized in a certain way. It's very similar to what they do in North Korea, actually, or in other communist type cults where there's like loudspeakers and stuff.
Yep, you're forced to gather and hear.
Right. And so what they do every morning is essentially you're forced to hear updates, whatever the leader wants you to get, a reading from the leader's booklets or philosophies or whatever. And then you're basically given, you're told like, okay, well now, report to your section leader essentially for your tasks for the day. Right. Or, your normal amount of work. And so the way that these islands are structured is there's the kind of lower rung farmer people, right? There's the farmers. Then there are those who actually, people who actually produce goods. So there is some technology going on here, but it's very minimal, right? It's stuff like, artisanal stuff, like, I don't know, like weaving baskets, right? Or making silk or whatever, right? It's not a lot of other stuff than that. It's very still kept quite primitive, almost like Amish style, but it is very, there is some industry happening, right? So you have the farmers, then you have the industry people or kind of the artisans, I guess you'd say. And then at the highest rung on those individual islands are the people who actually ship things back and forth and out of the island. Right. Yes. Those are like your kind of like leader of the island. Right. So every leader has almost its own cult leader itself.
You have sort of the hierarchy, right? Compartmentalization as well. Like the groups really don't know the other groups very much. They'll have pleasant communications with them, but they definitely won't like compare notes about things.
No.
Like,
right.
Oh yeah, we just made a bunch of we just did a bunch of this, and they would be like, oh, that's weird. We didn't send any of that out. We just got in a bunch of cattle or something, right?
It's very limited contact, right? Like Marie's saying. Now, after you get past that like individual island level, you get to kind of the inner circle of this group. And the way that works basically is you have sort of, it's actually not a very deep structure, I guess I'd say. But essentially, you have kind of Enoch, Foma Enoch at the very top. But then below him, you have like a rotating cast of other people, I guess I'd say, right? So there are people who...
Some people that we think are his family members, right? But it's hard to, like, it's very secretive about, like, if he has family members or relations versus people that he just puts in charge.
Right. It's not super clear because again, like one of the rules that he puts in place as well is no like familial connections, really. It's a much more like, I don't know, but we know so little about this cult really from the outside that it's kind of hard to tell, but it appears to be that there's not really a lot of like family making happening here.
No.
Or
yeah, all of it goes back to him, right? There's no other family. Like if you go on to, just like any cult, like if you go into this cult, you don't get to bring family.
No.
You don't get to bring anything that's an outside influence into this environment. All of this environment is focused on the one thing, then they have to keep you constantly focused on.
Yeah. And so,
insidious.
But around that leader, then you have kind of some members that seem closer to him that appear to be family linked or maybe just like close friends or whatever. And their kind of task is to go from island to island and ensure that kind of like order is kept, basically.
Yeah.
Are the rituals
bad lieutenants?
Right. Like, are the rituals being performed? Are there issues that need to be fixed? Whatever. But then directly below him, though, are it's a very similar relationship to like the Bhagwan and his secretaries. If you guys saw Wild Country, right? It's this like,
yes,
it's a female companion who has the leader's favor for some reason. And although in the case of the Bhagwan, the female companion seemed to be with him for like a long time, in the case of the Psionic Corporation, that companion seems to change somewhat pretty relatively frequently. So it seems that there was one companion at the very beginning of the cult, then another one for like, say, from maybe like 2000 to like 2010. And then from 2010 on, it's been this same final secretary that we have right now. But again, they change, and like what that role actually is very wishy-washy, right? It appears that they're kind of like the head of the head of the enforcement division, I guess, if we want to call it that. But there's not a lot of structure.
But they're also sort of the maternal force, or just sort of the balance in it to him as well, is how I look at it, right? Like, because she's definitely the heavy in collecting, is doling out orders and collecting any kind of tithe, but she's more of the sort of the velvet glove on the fist, right?
Yes. So yeah, and I think that's probably the perfect way.
And it's not like it isn't so much like, and there's not a lot of overt
discipline,
physical threatening either in any of this. This is the thing that I think is the most amazing, because at a certain point in any cult, there has been sort of escalation of violence and more physical threats. This is one cult that I feel like has been able to keep people subservient and sort of docile, but have been sort of bland and pleasant during it. Because during this time, while she's more, like I said, the sort of the velvet glove on the fist, he's still not. He's more aloof and I feel like is having to take on more and more responsibility or more and more growth.
But the thing is, though, that we know from ex-members that they're told basically like, yeah, you can leave whenever you want, but you're stuck on an island. Like, how are you going to leave? Right?
How are you going to leave?
The only, like, the helicopters take credits that you no longer have any of because you decided to leave. You know what I mean? Like, how are you going to get off the island? Like, there's
it's very psychological. Like, there's there's no hitting, but there's no physical torture, but it's bad because it's psychological.
Yeah, we don't
know, but from all outward purposes. Yeah.
Now, like Marie said before, though, the group has in recent years hit like seemingly has hit gold, or like there's oil on an island or something, because they are just making bank, right?
Yes.
Now, what people believe is happening, or at least there's some evidence for this, is that what is occurring is that there is trade through the islands in like antiquities that have been stolen, or exotic animals, or substances that shouldn't be traded. Like,
yes,
there seems to be some kind of
a lot of import. I think a lot of import and export,
black market kind of stuff.
Safe havens, and almost like safe havens, right? Like you can store money here. It's like almost like the Cayman Islands, except even more illicit. Like you can keep stuff and sell stuff and have stuff retained on this island, and it's like a safe harbor,
right? And so again, because there's kind of like this separation between the business side and like the cult-ish side, it's really hard to like pick apart what's happening, right? Like on the one hand, it seems like there is a purely benign like shipping or like, I guess like distributor, right? Because that's basically how they market themselves. Is like, we are a company that kind of brings, we travel stuff back and forth, right? But on the other hand, you then have this guy who's like living, you know, in these weird communes with people who can't leave. It's very strange. Now, this sounds all weird it sounds weird now, but it actually has gotten weirder in recent years.
Oh my God.
Because this group has now become embroiled, it seems, in UFO culture.
Oh my God.
And that is where we will pick up next episode, listeners. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.
Father's Day is coming up, and with giftcards.com, it's easy to score a perfect gift. Whether he loves tech, sports, gaming, or shopping, there is a great option for every dad. Or let Dad choose with the limited edition Happy Father's Day card. It features all Dad's favorites like Lowe's, GameStop, and Buffalo Wild Wings on one convenient card. Happy cards never expire, making them a perfect gift that everyone will love. Enjoy free shipping on all Happy cards